Hi, my name is Julia Smagorinsky. I'm presenting the Permaculture Design for Emergent Abundance Farming Collective at Spar Hill Farm. We're located in Kennett Township in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. My faculty mentor is Sylvia de Blasio. We openly recognize the Lenape Indian tribe as the original inhabitants of eastern Pennsylvania. We acknowledge the Lenape people as the indigenous stewards of their homelands and also the spiritual keepers of the Lenape Sipu, or Delaware River. And we do hereby commit to actively supporting our Lenape sisters and brothers in whatever way we are able, helping to maintain the cultural identity of Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, and Southern New York. While I'm bringing my agricultural education and over 25 years of organic farming experience to this project, my current main focus is really in working with communities to support resilience and to actively experiencing how we can change social systems into a more resilient, more loving and caring state. The vision for Emergent Abundance Farming Collective is to create access to land, to food, and to knowledge for the community, to foster a deep sense of community rooted in beauty, joy, and connection with nature as the foundation to radically enhance our resilience. Some of our goals include the improving our ecological and social resilience in times of climate change. Also connecting people to the landscape, to food resources in the landscape, by creating that connection of people to the land and by actually actively growing different kinds of plants in the landscape that are currently non-existent or rarely existent. So we would thereby then increase available food in the landscape and build diverse community through emergent solution and strategies. The creation of beauty and sacred spaces is also one of our main goals, as well as the creation of easy to read, manage, and navigate spaces, which will then allow for members of the community to actually utilize the space. This could also include clear pathways, as well as labeled plants and indications of what certain plants can be used for. We are seeking to produce diverse yields that are climate resilient and also addressing different needs. This would include fruit, vegetables, nuts, different types of protein sources, meats, grains, fibers, fuels, and resources for basketry making. You can see a little bit of some of our people in action in the field. This slide shows just a little sketch of how Emergent Abundance Farming Collective is coming about in terms of the social connections and how it's weaving in with the community. So a few years ago, I started gardening at a private farm that is not my own farm, and where I just had a land use agreement. And more people who knew us to come out and help me with the garden and learn from me. And the number of people who were showing interest and who were really enthusiastic about what we were doing was steadily growing. And so over time, we were starting to consider to move onto public land, which was in the beginning not yet the case. But we were able to start growing food. As the pandemic began in the spring of 2020, the need for fresh fruit and vegetables locally that the food bank would be able to donate to people in need really grew. So we were able to grow quite some excess of food that we were able to share and establish that connection to the Kennett Area Community Service food cupboard. So we tightened that connection over time, and we're then able to negotiate with Kennett Township the use of part of the land at Spar Hill Farm, which they had just recently acquired as a public open space. So at this time, it's still being negotiated what the overall plan will be for that space, and so this permaculture design is also part of that process of really kind of putting in a good proposal for what can be done with that land. At the moment, we're using about 1 acre at Spar Hill Farm on the public property. And then as time goes on, we have been able to build more connections within the community. We're currently working together with the library. They had already started a seed library project and are now including more and more permaculture books on their shelves. Also, we're going to do some movie screenings through the library and other activities. And then from here, we're going to go and just build more and more connections with other organizations. There's a water research center that does really amazing work in this area, for example, as well as some other organizations that will be able to tie into our work. So on this slide, I'm showing a little bit on how the feedback and adaptation loops were continuously within the social realm of emergent abundance. So like the initiating question is what emerges once we start, right? So you jump into this project and a lot is still unknown, but we just got started and we were aiming to build community right away, to create a visible garden, to plant things. So, there are plants in the landscape now, and to produce a yield right away. And then what emerges out of that, right? So that's one of those big questions. And as we go along, there's successes and failures, and we always aim to use those as feedback. One of the big questions in social realm is who is showing up, but also who's actually missing. We're creating an explicitly open space socially that is an open invitation to anybody who wants to join. We're very aware of all the kind of the unsaid boundaries that exist in our society, from racism to restrictions for people who have any kind of criminal records, to limitations to where children are allowed to show up, and on and on. So the question who is missing is really important, and then how can we create the space differently, the opportunities differently, so that those who are missing aren't missing because the access isn't there. but because they choose not to be there, that's another reason, right? So we're continuously improving our design, looking at what is working, what isn't working, and why. That's a really important one. I tend to learn a lot from working with very young children. If the space is set up right, they can be there. They can interact. They can work alongside with us. If it's not set up properly for them, it becomes stressful, right, for all involved. And children tend to not really want to be there. So that's it. That's a big feedback loop that I keep looking at. And then we work on improving communication, improving our training to be able to integrate people better and better, to share better. So for example, we are using a Basecamp as a project management app where people can actively communicate with each other and update each other on observations, on things they have done, accomplished in the field, etc., and organize meetups with other people. Continue to involve more people, more networking, and then the questions of integration as well as boundaries keep arising. You know, as you integrate more and more people, the need for boundaries does increase, and so things may have to be redefined a little bit. Another important feedback is people failing to show up, and this can have so many different reasons, from just societal factors to designing the space, the social space differently. We're hosting art of hosting gatherings and continue to adapt the design and with as much flexibility as possible. Here's another interesting aspect of designing a permaculture space on a community level. And it's the question about zones. So I'm finding that if I think about zones, I can think in terms of the property itself, and what we call these kind of classic permaculture zones, and with respect to how often does a certain space need attention, how accessible is it, and how's that located in terms of accessibility, etc. But then if I move that into the more regional level, because this is a community space and people don't actually live on the property. So the question actually, or the lens, kind of the perspective shifts. And I'm finding that, so if you look at this little drawing that I did here, the big circle around would be maybe 15 miles in radius. And we locate Spiral Farm at the center of the circle. And then there's all the individual homes that have their own zone 0, zone 1, zone 2. And now people need to travel. This is a big point in this kind of landscape where we live. Everything's very far apart. It's a kind of a recently suburbanized rural area that really favors individualized lifestyles. There's a lot of new developments with very big houses and big yards, an overwhelming monoculture of lawns, and just in general, a lack of food in the landscape. But what does this mean now in terms of this zone thinking? And the way I've come to think about it is that in the beginning of the development, when we just started to envision this, Spiral Farm was actually kind of a zone 5 for everybody. right? And so right here we have the zone 5, the green. And then as we started to engage in the space, we're starting to build more of kind of a zone 4 where we would maybe go once a week and observe. Sparhel Farm has some beautiful forest spaces and wetlands, some rivers, and so it does serve as a great walking place to engage with nature. There's also some current farming going on, and so as we started to envision the garden happening there, it became more of a zone 4. And if I put this now on as a collective thought, not just on an individual level, but more as a collective, we were building time commitment community, we're building the community, we're improving our communication, we're really tightening as a community. And so zone 3 can start to emerge, and social feedback loops, we're adapting design, we're increasing the relevance for each person. And through all that work, the identification and the responsibility that people can take as a collective is starting to increase, so that we're starting to become able to take care of a zone 2, and eventually we'll be able to take care of something that would resemble a zone 1, despite the fact that we're actually not living at the space, at that place. And so we have far ways to travel. And one criteria of a zone 1 would of course be that it's actually so close that we're not really dependent on fossil fuels to get there, but it has this intrinsic resiliency of closeness, right? Proximity, that is not given in this in our situation. So the zone 1, if we think over time, over maybe 20 years, it might be that we will be able to maintain a zone 1 collectively through the work of very many people for maybe 5 years, and maybe once fuel prices go up considerably and only some people might be able to reach it, or we can maybe have like a shuttle that goes there a few times a week, and some people are able to use their bike or walk to the farm. And then maybe that zone 1 will fade again, and we will have more of a zone 3 and zone 4 where people will come and harvest and forage and interact in a different way again. A Google Earth map of our farm. You can see there's some forest around and some other open land. We're looking at weather data and climate. I'm not going to go into very much detail here. We're in the Mid-Atlantic region. Some key factors here are that we have plenty of rainfall over the course of the year. About 1,200 millimeters a year. That's really plenty. On the land where we're currently at, there's definitely an abundance of water. We have 2 small creeks. There's some natural springs. The temperature ranges are quite dramatic in the Mid-Atlantic regions. We can have very cold winters down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And in the summer, the temperatures can rise all the way up to 108 degrees Fahrenheit. And the summers are extremely humid, very hot and humid, and really favor a lot of fungal growth, and also just very rampant plant growth, as well as rampant decomposition. So life is just super active in the summer month. Climate change has been impacting us in some ways, maybe mildly so far compared to other regions in the world, but it's definitely a factor. We're seeing the temperatures are kind of more fluctuating so that we can have quite warm winters. Last winter we had a drought in January as well as in April, which is extremely unusual. And then the rain patterns just get much more sporadic with longer periods of drought, and then the rain comes all at once and just creates pretty impressive flood events around here. That's the base map. The entire property is 103 acres. Okay, this is the access road that we come in. It kind of wraps around this way. And then we drive up the driveway into the property, and there's a parking lot here. All these buildings on the property are fairly dilapidated, and the township is still trying to decide what will happen with them. There's some requests from the Historical Society to maintain some of the buildings longer term. There's also a call just to tear them all down, so we really don't know which direction that will go. And these pictures show the current state of the farm. I think this was about midsummer, maybe in August. There are 2 creeks on the land, and through the work of a nature society, all these trees have been planted along the creeks as riparian buffers through, I think, during the last 2 or 3 years. There's currently conventional corn production still on the land, and you can see up here I'm standing on the hill looking down into the valley where the creek is flowing, and some of the buildings in the background and the established trees on the land. This is one of the creeks. And then in this picture, there's to the right of this picture is the old farmhouse, and this is an old ice house. This tree is a chestnut tree, which has become extremely rare in this region. It's probably an Asian chestnut because the American chestnuts have all been taken down by the blight and then by the action of people taking down the chestnuts in around 1900. And right here in this middle is a tree we found that was quite the surprise. It's actually a hardy orange, which is really quite the miracle. There's no citrus usually growing in this area. This map shows the current vegetation as well as the buildings. The chestnut tree I was just pointing out is right here. That's the building, and there's the little hardy orange in between right here. And the property is abutting this relatively large forest. As well, there's a forest on the land right here. It's a small, maybe 5 acre, no, maybe a little bit larger, 8 acre piece of forest where we started to grow some mushrooms. And so this little tributary creek flows down this way, and then this burrow runs down this way. And there's this area here is a wetland, and then all these tree plantings around. The water in the land, this is about the highest point on the land, and the water follows the flow of the contours down this way, but you can see where the arrows lead. The star over here is a natural spring that used to have a spring house over it. And the little dot here is a deep well that we would love to get back into working action through some solar powered pump. But that's might be in the future. And then you can see this line is where this is already part of the design, of course, but this is just so you get this idea, this is where our water current irrigation systems utilizing the gravity to bring water to our field, which is located right here. A quick sector overview with the summer wind coming from the east, the winter winds primarily come from the west. Most of the big snowstorm events come from the northeast right here. The storm water, the potential flood comes from uphill in this direction. And then of course there's people and dogs that kind of enter on the property. There's a public property where people are allowed to walk their dogs. You can also see the summer, the sun, and the winter sun. Kind of right here. Now, working with a community and a social context, I find that looking at emotional sectors and also our own emotional state is extremely important. Anything can get unhinged if that aspect of our being isn't really designed in and considered. Some of the major emotional sectors that we're experiencing is traumatization. People bring their stories, right? Bring their past trauma. And if we're not aware of that, we can easily re-traumatize each other, and that can really disrupt the whole group. COVID-19 has been, of course, a huge impact on what we're doing, both in terms of what is sometimes not possible, but also in terms of that the need for an outdoor community space is just so big at the moment, and people are really rejoicing in being able to come together, to meet, and to do something that has real purpose and meaning at this time. Illness, natural disaster, death, socialization aspects, like what does each of us, how have we been raised, what do we bring into the picture that shapes so much, including our expectations of each other, etc. Hormonal effects are huge in social spaces. And then of course death, and probably some more sectors that will show up as time continues. Now moving on to the design. This is the zones map. We're currently operating in zone 2A and zone 2B. Zone 2A is our garden proper, and zone 2B is kind of our relaxation and meeting space. There's an existing tree grove that we're utilizing as like a little shaded grove for just taking a break in the summer, for gathering. And we're continuing to design that into a more sheltered space. We're envisioning a zone 1 up on here, close to the parking lot, close to the water sources, where we can place a greenhouse with a little livestock shelter in the future. Zone 3. And zone 4B, right here, zone 3 will be an orchard with some integrated pastures for turkeys and rabbits. And then zone 4B is an edible food forest that has already been planted and that we currently haven't really been interacting with very much. It needs a little bit of maintenance in terms of weeding, and we're considering to design an understory planting in the future. Zone 4C over here, and over here is currently planted in corn and operated by another farmer in a conventional way. And if we get access to the whole farm in the future through the township, the idea would be to turn this into a mob grazing pasture with tree and shrubs planted along key lines to really to facilitate the water that currently runs off into the stream to really get absorbed into the ground along those key line plantings, and then also by having the mob grazing pasture really grow substantial root systems that then can act as a sponge for the water. Zone 5 here is a forest, and zone 5 here is a wetland, and that will just stay as that natural space. And then as well as here, these zone 5s are riparian buffer planted creek. So this map gives a little bit of just a quick overview of where we're located on the property. We're currently farming in this circle, and this is an enlarged area of the garden space right here. It's very rectangular for multiple reasons. The one is that the township is mowing the paths for us, and this makes it very easy for them to do an excellent job to maintain the lawn in between the field spaces. It's also really easy for members of the public who have little experience with gardening to come into a space that's relatively linear and with straight rows and straight plantings, and be able to actually harvest and seed and weed and understand where the paths are and where the field spaces are, etc. So our water system right now is very interesting. So the principle for our the water that we're using is simply rainwater. We have plenty of rainwater in this region, as I mentioned before, and one of the next slides I will show a little bit more of how that is designed and also to be enhanced, and how the rainwater is taken up into the field. We have a pretty good situation with respect to being able to use gravity as the source of our power for the water. We're currently not able to design any kind of rain catchment systems, as we can't use the roofs because the buildings are not safe for that, and we can't really do any major modifications to the land either. And the well is not on electricity right now, so we haven't been able to use the pump either, and we'll have to wait until further notice to see if we can install a solar pump in the future. So the interesting situation we have right now is that the township offered to have the fire department deliver water to us. So we're storing water in tanks uphill, and then when droughts hit, and only really when droughts hit, or as we're seeding new crops or planting new plants, we run this irrigation system to water in the new seedlings, or to get us through maybe an 8-week drought that we experience in the summer. And even then, just on some of the space, so we're trying to group all the more water sensitive plants, the drought sensitive plants, into the same plots, so we can specifically irrigate there, whereas the corn and the squash is just left to its own devices to just push through the droughts, which works really well. So on this slide, we can see that the way the field space is kind of designed is on a slight slope, and there's little ditches in the field that allow the rainwater to catch and then infiltrate into the ground and percolate through slowly. So we're just kind of increasing the intake of the rainwater into the soil. Just a little bit, and that really helps to maintain that storage of water, so that most of the plants, once they have been established, are doing really well without any further irrigation. So this is on a map, the design system. You can see over here from the road, the fire trucks come in, bring the water up the hill, and then we run the blue hose, a lay flat hose down, connected into the system here. And we have two pipes running down, one for hand watering wand and one for the drip irrigation lines. And then the rainwater that runs downhill also gets trapped in these ditches along the side of these fields, and then kind of can percolate into the space. So again, in a social design, considering the emotional welfare of everybody is really crucial. This map depicts the design of my own emotional zones, kind of where I am currently. I've been working a lot with this emotional zone concept and imagining in my mind my emotional landscape as this big garden, and the zone 0 being this big beautiful garden where I can just come and rest and replenish my energy and take care of myself. The zone 0 is a space where I do my meditation. It's my sacred home space. It's the time and the space that I take for my care for myself, and the rhythms that I have established that support me. I imagine this very protective hedge around me with some big thorns that can really keep all the unwanted forces outside. And so I think through the different zones and what do I place in which zone, and which relationships do I allow in the closer zones, and which relationships are better off in a zone 3 or zone 4. So I tend to consider that pretty carefully, and also see where do I, for example, keep the Emergent Abundance Farming Collective as such emotionally for myself. If I allow it too close in, I know that I will get very emotional about it and very upset about different things that might work or not work. But if I can keep it just a little bit more at an arm length in like a zone 3, emotionally speaking, I have a little bit more distance, and I can kind of stay grounded and be at a better position to observe what's happening, and then allow that feedback to inform the adaptive processes that are needed. This picture is showing the built environment of at the farm. Many of these buildings are not really in any repairable situation. For example, this barn up here is extremely dilapidated and dangerous, which kind of keeps us from using this really beautiful courtyard, because if children play in this barn area, it could become very dangerous for them. So we're trying to stay out of there for right now, but there's a possibility to use the space in the future for social events. There's a place up here that could be repurposed as a stage, for example, and also as a movie screening wall. We could also imagine somehow redesigning a space under here as an outdoor kitchen, for instance. A lot of possibilities for dreaming. We're currently using this little shed as our storage shed, which has been really awesome, and that's perfectly safe building that we can improve over time. Now we get to the edges and the microclimates. Big topic, of course. In the big picture, I would like to postulate that Emergent Abundance Farming Collective is in itself a social ecological edge. Here, so many people, different cultures, foods, ecosystems, and it just come together and new systems can emerge. Within the design, one thing I would like to point out is that so that our boundary around, we have a deer fence, and that's a 3-dimensional electric deer fence, which allows for clear visibility right through. It doesn't have that prison-like feeling to it. Deer can pass through if they're clever, loud, and enough, and daring enough. But by and large, it seems to work pretty well. These spaces that I marked with the orange are habitat niche gardens that are designed right into the spaces. And so we have for growing vegetables here in just straight rows. And then in this space, for example, we have wildflowers growing. Over here, we have an apple tree and lots of perennial native flowers. And over here, we're going to plant a whole big semicircle of figs along with lots of other perennial plants. Envisioning a little pond here, just as a little habitat, and for beauty and as a bird watering place. So people and the path. So this is the main path that goes down all the way into the forest, down by the creek and through the edible food forest. And then since this is laid out pretty linear, it's fairly self-explanatory. You can walk around this way and kind of. Now in the future, we're envisioning to bring in small livestock in movable pasture pens that we will be able to move right through these main lanes, moving them every day on fresh grass. Plant matter is recycled in the field mostly, just pulled out and put down back as mulch, feeding the microbes in the soil. We are able to get a lot of resources from the community. There is an abundance of wood chip mulch and leaf mulch, and then also mushroom compost from the local mushroom farms. So we're not lacking in organic matter by any means, and all that is freely available. And the township has been helping us with the transport of those materials. Technology, transportation, and energy. We're operating on a very low-tech system. We like quiet, we like hands-on work, we like to create a space that is safe for children. We currently don't have any electricity at the farm. Hopefully we can move towards a situation where we have some solar panels that can fuel a few things, and in the future maybe build 1 or 2 hoop houses that will help us really utilize the solar energy all through the winter. So here, another map that shows the design layout a little bit better. With the more perennial plantings already being planted in this space, asparagus, raspberries, strawberries, planting apple trees, hazelnuts, and blueberries. These rows are just straight rows for the vegetables. And then in these habitat niche spaces, we're including also many shrubs and perennial medicinal plants. This little area up here, I have designed as a children's garden with a willow hut right here and a little labyrinth kind of outdoor room space made with apples. So these are all apple trees growing in a hedge that we will hopefully start planting soon. And then the idea is to have a little tunnel here through a mountain where then the children can also have a slide going down, and some lovely little plants, maybe strawberries that they can pick here, plus some berries all around that they can interact with, and some pots and things for just some trials that they can do. And a hoop house fits right into this space, and that would be a wonderful addition to start some seedlings in the winter for the spring plantings, as well as having some protected space for cantaloupe growing and for the rabbits that we hopefully can get one day. So this was the beginning in March 2021. The local farmer who's also operating the corn production at Spar Hill offered to plow for us, which gave us an amazing start into the field. And yeah, so from bare soil, we were able to already establish quite the abundant garden. The implementation keeps going. We're almost through phase 1 right now. Establishing this zone 2 garden, making it visible in the landscape, beginning to bring in also a natural playground area, children's garden, get the water system up and running, the DFNs. So just these kind of more infrastructure work. Establish that the annual crop production through member participation and the drop-offs at the food cupboard. One of the big goals for the first phase is to really build the community and integrate around 20 to 50 people and or families, build a fundraising base, etc., etc. Yeah, and we currently have about 25 people actively participating. So we are well into this first implementation phase. The next step will be to formally organize as a nonprofit. Here you can see some of the plants healthily growing. The next step of our implementation phase includes, for example, the negotiation of a long-term land use agreement with a township, hosting more world cafes as major feedback and visioning events to really get the community involved on that level, solid fundraising plan, introducing small livestock, etc. And we've already been obtaining a yield, sharing our abundance. These are the hardy oranges that we found at the farm, quite delicious. And then implementation phase 3, moving into planting orchards and bringing in larger livestock, possibly building some ponds. And this is another beautiful morning at the farm.